from your side. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm back. Jana, thank you very, very much. I can say from the beginning that this was very, very valuable because I think very few of us would have braved the 100+ pages of the proposal, despite most of us, if not all of us, being very, very interested in the contents. I would actually ask you to open up your presentation again, and I'm going to take some of the questions that are in the panel, they are in the chat, and I'm going to bring them straight to the panel. There's a few that I would like to ask you also using the slides. And could you go back to the one about, that's called illegal AI or not allowed AI?
Sure. Yeah, they call it unacceptable AI, which is, it sounds a bit friendlier.
By the way, like I think everyone here watching knows that a big topic of this discussion in the panel later on is how broad the definitions are and how there's a space here for a race to the bottom where everybody's going to try to say like, oh, but actually my system is not exactly like this. So something I think that brought a lot of people when I saw that question also from, it was not from Elliot, but from somebody in the chat, it was to ask for an example of what that box in the right, on the top right corner would be. Because when I read it, I would say like social media could fall inside of this. And, or depending on the type of advertisement, it could fall inside of this. So do you have an idea of what, I had the feeling that the EU wrote that thinking of Cambridge Analytica, but the question is, do you have an example of what that box would be in the eyes of the EU? Or actually, how do you feel about it?
They always come up with the example of a toy for kids. With it includes an audio system, and then suddenly it starts speaking, and it tells the child something, and the child does it, and it's harmful. It might also fall into the third category, but yeah, I mean, it might also be in the second category. So subliminal techniques, yeah, that is actually a big problem, because what does it mean? I mean, yeah, if we speak about the fact that it's only a proposal, this, as you say, or as somebody in the audience say, it's all very wide. And
I think it's a very, very interesting concept, because especially if you're drawing parallels between users which are not to their conscience, that they don't realize that they're like other users and use that information to sell them something or to push something that they haven't thought about it yet. Is that a subliminal technique to help them sell? Like it's a very, very broad point. And can we take a look? Thank you very much. I unfortunately didn't write down who got that first question, but it was very good. There's a question from Gabriel, which I think was the first question in the panel, that in the chat. That was very, very good. Can we see the definition of AI systems again in the eyes of the EU?
I guess you didn't really see it before.
No. I think honestly, this is amazing, and I would very much like to ask later on if we can get some of those screenshots, because for like, I think nobody here would read the 100-something pages, but this is very, very well explained. So Gabriel is asking, like, they talk about statistical methods and approaches as something that would be AI. And then his question with tongue in cheek is, then anything that would calculate numbers and calculate an average, is that AI in the eyes of the EU? Like a
I think this includes any software, right?
According
to, isn't it? I mean, I'm the lawyer. I'm not the technical expert here, but it seems a little bit like.
But it has to fulfill both requirements, right? It's not just there are two requirements. Techniques that which then can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, make predictions, recommendations, and so forth. I think that might have been the misunderstanding. So just computing an average for a few numbers is hard to use for predictions, recommendations, and so forth. But if you do, then it is within the definition.
Exactly. No, you also need that second requirement. That's absolutely right. But again, it's also very wide, isn't it?
Let's look, all speakers, let's look at this, because I'm definitely going to bring this to the panel in a second. And then the final point, I think this is also good for us, because we're going to see a couple of the points that I'm going to be bringing for the panel. There's a point about chatbot interaction with humans. I think that is category 2 or 3, right?
Was it? I think that was the lower risk. Huh? Yeah. It's this one.
Yeah.
It's the lower risk AI system category.
So there is a question on how would interaction be defined? What is interaction? Like between a natural person, like is this any AI system that a user uses, or it's a very, very broad word?
Yeah, in the recitals they refer to, I think it's in the recitals or in the introduction text, they refer to an actual communication. Like,
okay, so
I go to an online shop and there is the AI asking me, do you have any questions? But of course, you could also see interaction broader and refer to any kind of, I put something in, something comes back.
All right. I think with that, I'm going to bring all of our speakers up on stage, on our digital stage, to talk on the panel. Also, because of the whole confusion before, I will reintroduce Jana. Jana Semrau Brandt, she's a accountant certified information privacy professional, and she's with the international law firm Dentons. She advises and represents companies in all matters of intellectual property, technology law, and focusing on IT law, data, and trade secret protection. Then we're followed by my very good friend and constant commentator here, Meetup-AI, Dr. Vince Madai, who is a senior healthcare AI researcher at the Charité Berlin. He has a PhD in medical neuroscience and an MA in medical ethics. He's also the scientific lead for the Charité Lab for Artificial Intelligence in Medicine, Claim Group, and a senior scientist at the Quest Center for Transforming Biomedical Research at the BIH. And then finally, we have Konstantinos Fysarakis. He's the Chief Technology Officer of Sphinx Analytics, working on research on pan-European research projects such as Intelliot, BioPhoenix, and Respect. He holds a PhD in electronic and computer engineering, and in the past has been an R&D researcher and R&D engineer and researcher for the Technical University of Crete. He's also a trust expert that I had the pleasure of having an event a few weeks ago. And now that all of you are formally introduced, I would like to already jump with the very first question to the panel, and we're gonna have Jana answering last this one. And we're gonna start off with Vince, then Konstantinos, and then Jana. How do you feel about what we just heard? Let's start with Vince, because regulation comes very close to ethics often, and we talk often about the need for more or less regulation. So how do you feel about what you just heard?
So maybe I'll answer your question and one of the questions that Jana raised actually in her talk when it came to, because my field, as you said, is healthcare. And then the question is, does it feel like overregulation when you add these requirements, let's say, on top of MDR, of medical device regulation? Now, the interesting thing is that currently, I would argue, and okay, it might be a little polemic, anything just manages to get certification that includes AI at the moment in healthcare, because the regulators have zero idea how to regulate it. So whether it has bias or not, so if you actually look up what kind of tools get certification, both in Europe through the MDR, but also in the US through the FDA, it's a catastrophe. It's an absolute catastrophe. So I usually say, when it's a normal medical device, when it's medication, this certification means something. If it's an AI in healthcare product, it means nothing. So I would really argue this is not over-regulation. This is really what we need, so that the regulators finally understand what they have to do, because now it's required by law that they actually test AI in healthcare products for bias, for performance. Is it actually something that is fulfilling the claim, and so forth and so forth. So I'm sad that it will take another 4 years until it's going to be in effect, because I think we need it today.
Very, very nice point. Konstantinos, how do you feel?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is just the start. I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. But as they try to apply it, it will definitely be refined, and it will become something more substantial. Right now, there's lots of questions, open, vague points. The classification you already mentioned about social networks, for example, they kind of get a free pass right now because they're considered the non-high risk system, while we know, what you get in your Facebook feed can definitely alter your beliefs, what you feel. So for me, I think it's the definition of a high risk system. But they also don't want to over-regulate. I think they also try not to scare our US friends, and to try to find a common ground there, because they have the under-regulation, let's say, mentality there, more or less. There's many things. It's what we said. There's many things that not even the experts understand, let alone the regulators or people doing the legislation. I mean, this regulation kind of takes a lot of points from the EU had released, I think before that, some ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI, and they tried to incorporate that. So basically, they said, AI has to be lawful, has to be ethical, and has to be robust, so to be secure and so on. And trying to break this down into specific things that you can check in an assessment is not very straightforward. So I will see. I mean, I see that definitely when we try to apply this, we will have to make it more precise, let's say.
Very, very good point. And finally, Jana, after this whole presentation explaining us non-lawyers this whole thing, how do you feel about it?
Well, lawyers are probably very happy with it, because there's a lot of work which you can put into trying to put this not into effect, but actually to consult companies in implementing it. And now I can agree 100% to Konstantinos. I mean, it's a try, and I think the EU Commission has really tried hard. I mean, there was a lot of consultation work in the beginning, a lot of discussion. They really tried to consider everything that was sent to them when they asked for feedback. But for example, I just checked the definition catalog in the proposal. For example, this term interaction, it's not defined. So right now, nobody knows what that means. We all might have a certain image. We all have a certain opinion what interaction might be or what makes sense with regard to regulation. But in the end, it will either need a more precise definition, or there will be a court ruling several years after the AIA has come into effect, and the court tells us what interaction means. So far, of course, it's open for interpretation, and practice will show whether that makes sense or not.
We also had a bit of that feeling of GDPR back in the day, right? That there was some things that were still unexplained, and everybody was waiting on the first judgment and the first rulings to figure out how much teeth it would have and everything else.
And it's in effect 3 years now, and there are not so many court decisions so far, which would help with the whole GDPR. So there you can see how long it takes.
We're going to bring the GDPR point again in a second, but I would like to bring something up that Marine and Jennifer were talking in the chat, which I really like. And once again, it comes back to things being a bit too abstract. So in a sense, marketing could fall in the fourth category, like any marketing AI, because they're not interacting directly with customers. There's no communication with them. They're just kind of figuring out which kind of ad should show at which kind of place, right? So any ad tech would try automatically to say we are the fourth group. At the same time, we already had the beginning of this discussion. What is subliminal techniques, right? And as a point that Jennifer made, that a lot of marketing is basically on subliminal techniques. And that means that you would jump from the very bottom of the pyramid back to being unacceptable AIs. So there's a whole connection there for industry, which, let's just remind ourselves, like ad tech is one of the most profitable areas in technology when you think about it. And it is very large companies working on it, as well as hundreds of small startups. So how, like, I would actually, that brings a different topic also from that I would like to ask all the speakers. Do you think that this abstraction is going to lead to a race to the bottom, where everybody's just going to try to say we're fourth fourth group. So whoever wants to take this point first.
Yeah, the funny point is that this jump or not jump comes after self-assessment generally, because generally the companies are asked to assess themselves in which category they fall into. I mean, of course, this is not set in stone then. Of course, the notified body can come and say, no, you're not the fourth category, you're actually the first category. But yeah, no, it's weird. I guess either there will be it will be more precise in the actual final draft or in the AIA itself, or there will be, like it is now the case with the GDPR, there will be like consultation documents from working groups in the field that say, okay, we think that this technique is subliminal. Because again, I check very quickly, also subliminal is not defined. But I mean, on the other hand, it's also understandable, because where do you close the definition? Of course, you have to be open for everything, right? Once you write something down, you're kind of outside of any technical development. Next week, there might be a new technique which should fall into this category, but because you have actually written down the definition, it doesn't fall into it anymore. So that's the problem with setting up a regulation.
But it's very tough, because if you take this current very vague definition, I could argue that prevention tool, an app on your phone that, you know, for prevention of cardiovascular disease, where I use gamification so that you actually change your behavior to be healthier, that could actually maybe even fall under that definition, which I think would argue would not be that great, because I think it's really good for you or for any other user. So that is, and just to answer your question, Nico, I mean, that always happens, right? So when you think of medical devices, where usually the companies, when they talk to the users, it's this great system that can do anything. But when they talk to the regulators, suddenly it can't do anything. It's basically just providing information. So everybody always tries to be in the lower categories, because it costs a lot of money and it's a lot of effort to get certification in higher brackets. But as Jana said, in the end, it's not only you who decides. So if you actually go to the market and saying, oh, we're a low risk device, but it's actually used in heart surgery, it doesn't take long until somebody will close you down very quickly.
Yeah, once again, we come back to the fact that we need rulings basically to be able to give teeth to a lot of what is already written there. Konstantinos, there's already one of your favorite topics in the chat, which is trust. So you're going to get a slightly different question, but just answering a point from PG, he was asking if there are any situations where we think a human wouldn't be regulated, but now an AI would. And I was thinking that back in the day when I started my studies in Frankfurt, one of the jobs that a lot of students took was working at basically the BVG or the trains from Frankfurt, and you'd take calls from people saying like, yeah, your train is delayed, you'll come back in 5 minutes. Just wait for it now, and then the train's gonna come back. In a sense, that was not regulated. Like they did a minimal training, if anything, and they just answer a phone to say like, I'm seeing that it will come in 5 minutes. But on Jana's structure, any AI giving recommendations on transport and other like crucial infrastructure would be a class 2 AI, which means that AI would have to be fairly regulated to be able to give predictions, even if it is your bus is going to be coming in 5 minutes, so just wait over there. So that just popped to my mind. Konstantinos?
I would link this to I think Elliot also mentioned that all of this discussion is about trust. How can we trust the AI? And trust comes from a number of, is obviously a social contract. And it comes from a number of sources. It comes from morals, from reputation, from institutions and regulations that we're discussing now, and also from security controls and other mechanisms in place. So for example, you trust driving a car is regulated in the sense that you have to get a driver's license. And we trust you that you can drive a car and you get a driver's license. If you instead, by a Tesla that drives itself, obviously this has to have some other form of regulation and checks and security controls to allow us to trust it. And then there is still the need, what Jana mentioned about the stop button. So when the driver, for example, takes over the wheel, the autopilot should be disabled, for example. But the thing is, we're moving. I'm a bit more pessimistic, let's say, because we're moving in a few years. We will have cars that don't have you will just sit on a seat, like 4 seats looking across to each other, and that's the vehicle. And other than the questions of semantics and interpretation, so what is interaction and what is sentiment manipulation or things like that, we actually, you mentioned GDPR, and we're still trying to figure out GDPR, where we actually have the controls to technically we understand data and we understand controls more than we do in AI. In AI, we're trying to regulate the technology we don't even understand. I mean, even people that build AI don't have full control. Like the elephant in the room in AI is transparency. So is what we say usually the explainability problem. I don't know if any of you have read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There is like this book. So there is a very advanced alien race, and they build a supercomputer to find the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And after 7.5 million years, they come back, and the computer comes back and it says the answer is 42. And obviously, they don't understand the answer, and they figure out that they don't even know what the question was, actually, the real question. So they built another supercomputer to find the answer to which the question to which the answer is 42. So this is explainability is a very big problem, because to exploit there's a trade-off between the capabilities of AI that everyone is pursuing. They want it to be as capable as possible, but there is a trade-off between explainability and the capabilities. When you try to make it explainable so that our poor minds can understand how it reached its conclusions, it kind of defeats the purpose of a lot of the AI applications and techniques. Because the point in AI is that it can find, for example, connections that our mind would not normally make. So for me, I'm a bit pessimistic, because there is lots of things that can go wrong. AI is already, deciding if you're going to get a loan, what news you will read. So if you're going to have a good mood or a bad mood in the morning, depending on what's on your newsfeed. If your CV is going to be discarded from the job that you applied, cars, healthcare, and so on. And we still don't understand how to make trustworthy AI. And regulation is good, because we will have to, it tells you have to figure it out. But I think we're very far from having an answer right now.
Very, very good point. And Vince, I'm going to send this over to you together with a small extra. And thank you very much for everybody in the chat that is chatting and talking also between themselves. Like, this is super nice. Elliot even said something that made me laugh about the whole transparency being the elephant in the room in AI. And Elliot says the elephant has to be tamed before he runs wildly, which is a pretty nice idea. But Vince, so we're talking about trust and how to build trust in this case, and then transparency comes about. And I know, because I had you on the Meetup-AI for a few times, we talk often about this, about transparency, about trust, and about bias. Now, after hearing the regulation, how do you feel about those main topics of yours? Do you feel that we're walking in the right direction? How are your points about this?
Generally, yes, especially when it comes to explainability. The concept that Konstantinos just mentioned, I would like to point out an issue which I think exemplifies very well how complicated things can become. One of the most popular AI techniques at the moment, probably most of the people here know, artificial neural nets, especially deep learning, which are black boxes. So then you have explainability techniques that you can use to post hoc generate explanations. Now, there are several people that have been doing great work and have, you know, come up with multitudes of techniques with which you can do this. But then there are now many people that say, wait a minute, these techniques are actually not very trustworthy. They generate local explanations, like basically you fit another model to your black box. It generates local explanations. It's not an explanation for what's happening globally. And we cannot really trust these explanation methods. We in our lab, we for several use cases have applied several of these techniques, and it's a complete mess. We have no idea what is going on here. So the level of explainability, post hoc explainability, so how good these techniques work, whether we should use them at all. So all this is not solved. Now imagine that in a few years, suddenly we have regulation that requires these techniques to be used. Is that then really good? When we force people to use techniques that are not validated, might not even actually lead to trustworthy explanations, but we believe it is because it's a requirement for trustworthy AI in the EU regulation. So it is just as food for thought. It's not that easy.
And I'm actually going to hold the puck at you, Vince, and then I'm going to send this question to the other speakers, because this is a topic of research for you, which is basically to bring AI from research to products. So the question for you and then for the whole panel is, as it is right now, do you think this will be implementable? Do you think that it is, as it is, something that startups could implement, or do you think that it is not possible at the moment?
Absolutely. It will just change a lot with regards to the how the business works, how the business model works. And we see this with AI in healthcare products, where, you know, many startups need to figure out what is actually our business model. What we do is very similar to biotech because it's regulated and everything, but we do not have all these dozens of big pharma companies that will buy us after a few years. So what will we do? So this will change, but in the end, any regulated area also produces products. So I'm not concerned that suddenly, you know, AI will stop to exist. But business models and financing will need to change, and it will probably take a few years until this will work properly.
Konstantinos, same question for you. And then I want to, because you know me and I like to always make it a bit harder for you. Something that worries me, it's the wording on the transparency part and the wording on the stop button. So do you think, as it is written right now, is that implementable for a startup, artificial intelligence startup, to have both things, to have something that would be transparent enough to fit the criteria that the EU puts it out there, and that would have like a kill switch that you can kind of, I imagine that would kind of make it anything that is offline or that has any offline applications like almost impossible to get approved.
I think definitely, as it is now, it's not, let's say, it is implementable in the sense that it gives some guidelines, but when people will try to actually implement it, and we see that in practice, we will actually be able to both define exactly the meaning of the wording, but also the techniques that are acceptable in an assessment that will be carried out by regulators, for example, for a specific product. I'm not really sure it's implementable in the technical part. So the kill switch that you mentioned, for example, it's okay in human in the loop or human on the loop systems where you have a human in the process. But I'm not really sure. There are many applications of AI which are not intended to be like that. So I mentioned, for example, the vehicle, the self-driving vehicle. When we don't have a wheel, what's the kill switch? You stop the car and then someone crashes on you. So what's the point in that? If you have like a system that makes diagnosis for patients, you obviously have a doctor there that decides if it can trust the machine or not. And then again, we come to the explainability, because if the machine says something that the doctor cannot see, and the AI says this patient is going to have that in 6 months from now, and we don't know why or how, do we trust that, and do we transfer that to the patient and we start him on treatment or something? So there we have the option of not transferring not giving any notice to that information. But if you have like a smartwatch that gives the recommendation directly to the patient, then you don't have this doctor that can filter out potentially dangerous recommendations, for example. So the kill switch is not other than taking a hammer perhaps and breaking the device. I don't know in many cases how it can be applied. It all boils down to that. I don't think we understand exactly how these systems work. And yeah,
I think it's very funny because in Meetup-AI, we do pride ourselves on talking a lot about practical AI and not, let's say, the ideas of the end of the world and what AI will mean in 50 years. But I don't know why. When I read the kill switch, I think that somebody had Skynet in mind, and they just felt like, I need to be able to pull the plug, like that some guy just read a lot of Isaac Asimov and was like, okay, at some point I need to be able to pull the cord and then shut off the machine so it cannot kill us.
The thing is that you have to take in consideration, so you have to make sure all the devices are fail in a secure way. So when you pull the plug, nobody's gonna crash on you, the patient is not gonna die, the system will revert in a state that is secure and safe, more importantly.
Very good point.
So this is another consideration.
To fail securely, that's a very, very interesting point, Konstantinos. Thank you very much for that one. Then I'm going to take a question from Steffi, and that one is for Jana. And she feels, basically, this was a short presentation that Jana provided us, so there's also a lot of other pages inside, but she's saying that something that she's missing from the draft are the rights of the users and the rights of the consumers. And she's asking if the only right that the users have is to be informed of what is being collected, or maybe consent on data. Like how is the user in this situation? Does the user come out stronger based on this regulation, or how do you feel, Jana?
Yeah, actually, we have to be careful with the term, because the user also has some obligations according to the proposal, but user in this sense is more like the operator. So the provider is the company person who brings it on the market, and then there might be someone who picks it up, puts it into a product, and then offers this product. And then there is let's say, consumer at the end. So the user is actually someone who also has to fulfill some basic requirements. But yeah, you're right. I mean, let's call him the consumer or the person affected. Of course, they had this person in mind when they set up, for example, transparency requirements. But yeah, in the end, that's all. I mean, they more refer to the fundamental rights in the European Union that need to be protected. Of course, these rights belong to consumers, humans in the end. But yeah, they don't say too much about it, and I think that comes because these requirements are not only relevant on the last stage where the AI system is actually dealing with a human on the other side, but also with regard to setting the whole thing up, with regard to development, putting it on the market. So they also have to consider several stages before, also with regard to like prevention. That's probably how you can call it. Yeah, does he come out stronger? I don't know. I mean, the whole regulation is also about theory. What are the risks that they have to keep in mind? What are the risks that they have to prevent? Sometimes the human on the last stage on the other side might only be affected in theory, I think. But yeah, they're trying to consider every scenario and to write it all down. I guess the consumer comes out stronger, but maybe not 100% strong.
That's a very good point. I think, and that's a question that it comes from Isabel Bear, and it's about GDPR. So basically, when GDPR came about in the beginning, there was a lot of pressure saying that this would ruin a lot of startups. We had a couple of months of a lot of American websites not being available in Europe anymore. And nowadays, internationally, GDPR is seen as a pretty decent success, is a mark for regulatory regulatory approval, let's call it like this, for data in general. In a lot of countries that don't want to put the effort into deciding for themselves or for any reasons, they see the GDPR as something to be copied, or at least as a framework. Do you think that this is also the objective now with this AI framework, given that they are also pushing companies which are not only based in Europe, but also that deal with European users?
Yeah,
I will go to Jana, yeah.
Yeah, I think we can expect that other countries will look at that. Obviously, it is something, right? It is a first big try to regulate AI. So I'm sure that's considered internationally, and maybe other countries will try to adapt to it. Maybe also some years later after its application, because then we know where we are and whether there need to be some improvements. It probably makes more sense. But in this case, it's definitely comparable to the GDPR.
Very nice. Vince, you want to say something?
Yeah, just very briefly. And I really think we should try it, because I think neither the United States nor China will do this. So I think trying to show an alternative where we do allow the innovation that we want, but just forbid certain things that we absolutely do not want, I think that would be, and to show that this works, could be a nice alternative to, oh, that's just new tech and we can't do anything about it. That's innovation. I think that's lazy.
It's a very good point. I think it brings back something that was stalled in the GDPR times, which was like a European brand of data collection. And so we would be talking about a European brand of artificial intelligence. And now for Konstantinos and Vince, by the way, we only have 10 more minutes in the talk. So if you have final questions, I'm going to be taking a look at everything. But what do you think is going to be the short-term effect of proposals like this in the startup ecosystem in Europe? Do you think that we're going to lose talent? Do you think we're going to lose thing? Even if you say, as I know Vince might think, we might lose a little, but it would be worth it. Like, I just want to know from your point of view, how would that affect us short term? So I'll do Konstantinos first, and then Vince, and then Jana.
I think short term is going to be definitely, it will definitely complicate things, especially for smaller companies. But I think in the long run, it will definitely benefit everyone, because it will allow people to understand AI and its implications better, and to, let's say, build on more solid foundations. I too think that the EU has, let's say, an ethical obligation to work on this, because I don't see anyone else working on this. I mean, the number one thing that the regulation is prohibiting is social credit scores. And this is something that China is already implementing. In the US, they have this more liberal view about the market will regulate itself. And personally, I don't think our world works that way. So even if it makes my life harder, I think it's definitely something that we should do.
Very, very nice. Vince?
I mean, I basically said before what I think about it. Just to add maybe just an additional comment. When very often, and I read it on LinkedIn a lot, people write, oh, this is very bad because this is regulation and it will limit innovation. I'm like, yes, that's kind of the point. We limit innovation because there are just certain things where we don't want to see innovation. Yes, there's always then an additional overhead, which makes it harder also for people who would not have developed something that is bad to prove that it's not bad. Yes, this overhead exists, but this is simply the cost for a situation where planes just usually the last years it changed a little bit and we were all shocked about it, but we're used to a situation where planes just don't fall from the sky regularly because somebody just started a new airplane company and it was very innovative. So that just in many other areas, we just got used to this level of safety, and I really don't see a problem to have that level of safety, especially in the area of AI.
And yeah, for you, they're going to be, you can comment on this as well if you want, but there's also 2 questions from the chat for you. So do you have anything else to add, or
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Vince. Yeah, and also as a lawyer, what shall I say? Huh? I mean, I can't say anything about laws or regulation. That's my business. But yeah, right now it's let's say uncomfortable for companies, even if they don't fall into this first category, which means they only have to follow the requirements, but still may bring their product to the market. It's uncomfortable, but I also think that there will be standards, there will be help from industry associations, there will be guidelines how to handle it, and then in the end, yeah, it will be okay, I guess. Yeah.
It's a very, very good point. And then I'm going to do a couple of quick ones with you, Jana. The first one, and that's from Isabel again, just to be 100% sure, based on the proposal, non-EU companies that work with European users or customers would also have to follow those rules, right?
Yes, exactly the same as with the GDPR.
That's a very, very good point. And then a question that actually Vince might also want to jump on top. It's the question of monitoring. So basically, there's a compromise there to keep monitoring products after they go in the market and to track changes. And I think this is something that we see a lot in medical device regulations, as Vince knows. But then we'll also face a question in artificial intelligence of how much, if the algorithm is always being updated, how much change is considered real change. So do you feel that this is going to be a bit problematic moving forward, Jana? I think there's a lot of things that we have to kind of specify, but monitoring for AI is not as simple as it sounds.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, this it's kind of contradicting, isn't it? The AI system is meant to develop, but somehow this need to monitor and the need to eventually adjust the conformity assessment or the whole like monitoring documentation. Yeah, you shall keep that in mind if the AI is developing. Again, the proposal doesn't say anything about the actual threshold from where on you need to adjust the assessment in practice. This, I guess, will also be told by practice. At what stage you actually have to change something.
That's a very good point. Vince, you want to make a commentary, because that is it's a common topic in healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, there's maybe one point that we haven't talked about yet. Where will all the people come from that are actually experts enough to assess all these systems? Because there will be many. And many of the experts will earn six-figure salaries or even more at big tech companies, or will have very good salaries at other companies. So why would they work for, you know, some notified body or similar that is suddenly now assessing AI systems? So I have the fear that all of this sounds great and it will be on paper, but then we have a similar situation that we have now that I touched upon the beginning of our panel with the medical devices based on AI that are on paper assessed, but it doesn't mean anything. That will also be that would be a really bad situation where, you know, you have trustworthiness only on paper. So this I'm not sure how that will be solved, where all these thousands of people will come from that will assess the systems.
It's a very, very good point. Like so basically a skill shortage in this whole thing. So I'm going to be bringing the final questions from the audience and from us, and also be sharing some links in the chat. Stephanie, if you could share the link to Meetup-AI community. We have another event coming up with the Human in the Loop with our friends from Intelliate. So if you like the topic of how fully autonomous and semi-autonomous AI systems should work, please join us there. There's also the link for their YouTube channel where this recording also going to go later on. And there's a lot of other talks in different topics. So I also recommend Vince. It's also there, so you can see his face if you miss him. And one final point before I come to the final question, it is, was I the only one surprised that deepfakes are so low in the list of worries? Like, for something with such a bad reputation, you would have expected that it would be very, very high up. And I saw in the chat that people were on fire about that. Everybody was so surprised that deepfakes are so low. And a lot of people felt that there was not a specific point about consent there. Like, so Jana, you first, and then I would like to hear from the other speakers.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is the information duty with regard to deepfake. So the EU Commission says, okay, you have to inform the human on the other side, but there is no consent requirement. That's actually a very interesting point.
Right.
Why is that with in comparison to the GDPR, for example? Why is that? Why may an AI system used just because of this single information, and there doesn't have to be anything in return? Yeah, that's actually very interesting. But that's the point that they followed. That's yeah, once the human is informed and is still using the AI, then it's fine, even with regard to deepfake. But I've heard that concern several times before. Yeah.
I have a question to the lawyer. So, because I was wondering, I mean, if there's a deepfake using someone's data, that is already forbidden, right? According to the current regulations. Isn't that the point? Isn't it? So if I just take your image and I put it on someone else and create a deepfake, isn't that already kind of forbidden? Isn't that violating already?
With regard to GDPR or personality right, for example?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, was this is already forbidden, so I don't need to regulate it. So whatever we find here is kind of legal deepfakes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's a very good point, Vince. But we had a comment from the audience, which unfortunately I cannot fish it, but I'm going to risk it. Was from Jennifer Koenig, that says, what about public figures or politicians? And what about if the deepfake is meant to be satire or art? So we're going to start getting into points which normally have exclusive rights to play with image or with the semblance of somebody. So not having, let's say, specific regulation on deepfakes would allow anybody to say, oh, no, I'm an artist. Like, I'm just doing this because it's my art, or this is satire or comedy.
But this is something that happens today as well. If I just take someone's, I mean, there are always also, I mean, there's also this one company, rental company, that regularly takes the images of politicians and even uses it for advertising. So this is not new, right? So this is that you have to find a threshold, and that's why we have lawyers. I mean, otherwise you would be without, salary. That would be sad. So I'm not sure I see big differences here to other areas, but again, I'm not the lawyer, so I'll decide.
Yeah, but again, I mean, I can only talk about German law. This is an EU regulation. I don't know if the legal situation might be different in other countries. So they, of course, they are following an approach here which is universal with regard to the EU. So I'm not sure if they actually had this in mind, that there are also other provisions or regulations which would help in such a situation and keep the human safe.
They probably really thought like the combination of EU law with national law on that point, specifically when you mentioned that they also have to follow extra rules from their specific industries. Like, this is going to be a very, very complex topic. We're going to be bringing this panel to a close. I already put my LinkedIn on the chat. Normally I say, reach out to the speakers. They are great people. Send your questions to them, talk to them about the work. I imagine all of you are the easiest to find on LinkedIn. And I was also going to say, reach out. Like, if you really like this topic, I had the feeling that maybe we should bring it up again, because it was really good conversation. I feel that it's such a rare opportunity for us to actually have a lawyer this deep into a tech cave to provide us some light about this, that if you really like the topic and if you find this very interesting, I see PG nodding over there, like he shares my feelings. But if this is a topic that you want to hear more, maybe more of the discussion, or more like in general, just reach out to me. Then maybe we can organize something with Jana again in a different side of this conversation. And then the final question for the topic, I'm going to send it to Jana first, and then to each one of our speakers. And it is, so we know how regulation is moving right now. What do you expect in the future on top of that? So for Jana, you can follow your very, let's say, legal perspective of this whole thing. And then for our two speakers, I would ask, like, we kind of heard today where regulation is going. What is still missing in your opinion? So Jana first, then Konstantinos, then Vince.
Yeah, I mean, we already talked about several points where yeah, that might not work in practice, or that might need adjustment. That could be definitions which are too narrow. That could be, for example, the interplay with the other regulations in the annex. I'm sure that there will be more discussion until the actual AIA is adopted. And also, I mean, this sounds a little bit funny, me saying that to the audience, but actually now you still have the chance to change it, because it is only a proposal, and the EU Commission is generally open for comments, for discussions. Probably not from any company here in the audience. But if you, for example, check with an industry association like KI Bundesverband or somebody like that, who might actually deliver a final opinion on this proposal, you can still hear your voice and make your voice loud, and still try to influence it. Yeah, there is still a chance. It's not set in stone yet.
Very, very good point, Jana. Do you know which Verband people should reach out in Germany?
I just know the KI Bundesverband.
All right. So people that want to still get involved in this kind of thing and want to hear their voices heard, there's still time. Reach out. I think that's exactly the reason why the EU puts proposals, is to invite people to kind of talk. And if that doesn't work and people have time and resources, just do a lot of deep fakes about European members of parliament. And until they realize that deepfakes might have to go on a higher on a higher list of regulatory approval. And then to close up, Konstantinos and Vince, your thoughts on what is still missing or what should still come in the future?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it reads like a very good wish list. So they try to cover, and I think they did really a good job of covering all the requirements for trustworthy AI. But they without stepping onto too many toes and causing too much, let's say, trouble. Trying to get also, as I said before, some let's say room for collaboration with the US and so on. But yeah, there is lots to be further specified as we move from this wish list to something that can be actually implemented on real products and services.
It's a very good point, Vince. Then the final words of the panel are yours.
So you asked me what's missing. I think that expertise is missing. And what I mean by that is I just want to single out this one point where I think it was written, systems, AI systems should be without error. I'm like,
yes.
AI systems without error. So if that is what is inside, and I believe you, Jana, that they wrote it like this, then I'm really wondering who drafted this, because there isn't a single prediction system that was trained without error. So it seems, and this could also be a reason for at least part of the vagueness that we feel, is that it was written by people who were not really sure what these things exactly mean. And you'd be surprised, these things happen. But then we also need more expertise in the general population, because in the end, I mean, this is a bubble here, right? This is the Meetup.AI bubble. It's about people interested in AI. It's experts in AI talking about it.
And we struggle.
but in the end, we struggle, but in the end, it will affect, I mean, I don't know, minus UK, I don't know anymore, but roughly 500 million people. So this is so, and I would argue that the majority of these people have no idea what is going on here, which is really a problem, because we don't have such a huge gap between lawmakers and knowledge in the general population and in most other areas. So I'm concerned about that.